Welcome to the Footstep Training tutorial for Internal Quality Assurance. This is for understanding the principles and practices of internally assuring the quality of assessment. The aims of this tutorial is for you to be able to understand the context and principles of internal quality assurance, understand how to plan the internal quality assurance of assessment, to understand techniques and criteria for monitoring the quality of assessment internally, understand how to internally maintain and improve the quality of assessment, understand how to manage information relevant to the internal quality assurance of assessment, and to understand the legal and good practice requirements for the internal quality assurance of assessment. Firstly, we're looking at understand the context and principles of internal quality assurance. The main function of quality assurance is for you to be able to quality assure every aspect of the qualification. You need to ensure consistency throughout, and this is across the whole cohort of learners, for example, and also across assessors if you're managing a group of assessors. You need to ensure that all evidence is valid, authentic, reliable, current, and sufficient, and making sure that they've made that valid assessment decision and that the assessment decision has been made and it's clearly recorded by the assessor. You also need to do it to comply with awarding organisation requirements by working with the external verifier, or otherly known as the external quality assurance. The role of the IQA, which is the abbreviation for internal quality assurance, is to firstly verify assessment. So looking at the assessor's decision, making sure, again going back, making sure it's valid, authentic, reliable, sufficient and current, and that it's fair as well. Your other role is to develop and support assessors, regardless of their experience. Especially if they're new to assessing, they need to be supported thoroughly to ensure that they know how to make correct decisions and are competent to do so, and able to support their learners to achieve their qualifications. But also for those experienced assessors, making sure that they're also supported and they're developing their practice and improving it. And overall to manage quality assurance, so making sure that every certificate that's being claimed by the organisation is quality assured. The IQA will need to verify assessment by sampling assessments throughout the programme, so this will be at the start, middle and end of the programme. For example, if it's a course that's running over 5 days, you might look at it on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. That's just a quick example. Most of the qualifications that you'll probably come into contact are over a longer period of time, so it might be over a few months. Especially with regards to apprenticeships, they might be on programme for up to a year, so 12 months to 24. So that's when it's vital to make sure that you are sampling at the beginning, middle and end. What you want to avoid is obviously only sampling at the end of a qualification, and in which case, especially if they've been on programme for 12 months, all of the assessment decisions might be incorrect, or the assessor might have missed something, in which case they're going to have to go right back and assess that learner again, which is going to cause problems for the learner. That's why it's vital to quality assure regularly and throughout. Another thing that you'll need to do is monitor assessment practice, so having a look at portfolios as well as observing assessments, and that can be really key, making sure that you're getting out and observing your assessors, making assessment decisions and talking to them with their learners. And lastly, standardising assessment judgments, and this can be done via standardisation meetings or tasks, so making sure that regardless of who the assessor is, that assessment judgments are standardised and also consistent across all of your assessors and all of the learners. Regulations to follow as an IQA. Awarding organisations check and provide guidance on internal quality assurance requirements. The awarding organisations are the ones that are able to certificate the qualifications. So the training provider will obviously deliver the training. For example, you as the IQA will be quality assuring the quality of assessment. The training provider will then claim the certificate from the awarding organisation. You'll then receive the certificate as the training provider and be able to then pass it on to the learner. The Sector Skills Council are independent employer-led organisations that serve to promote and develop a skilled workforce. There are 25 Sector Skills Councils in the UK, and each represent a different employment sector. Here we've provided a link for you to be able to search which Sector Skills Council works with your qualifications that you're quality assuring. Each Sector Skills Council provides the national occupational standards that the awarding bodies use to write the qualifications. The Office of Qualification and Examinations Regulation, also known as Ofqual, regulate the assessment process. They monitor standards in qualifications and assessments, for example, marking quality and access to assessment. They maintain public confidence in the qualification system. They also raise awareness of issues relating to assessment and processes and procedures and ensure the efficiency of the qualification industry. It is worth noting that the majority of Ofqual regulations are implemented via awarding organisations. Again, here we've provided a link for you to search and research more about Ofqual. Next, we're looking at the Internal Quality Assurance Strategy. An IQA strategy is a document similar to a policy and procedure, that clearly states and explains how an organisation is going to quality assure. It will include details such as how they will monitor their assessors, what standardisation they'll carry out, what level of sampling they'll do, and what level of observations they'll complete. The purpose of the IQA strategy is to ensure that the organisation consistently manages quality. One example of a method adopted for many organisations in an IQA strategy is a traffic light system. So this works on looking at their assessors and grading them in either a green, amber or red status. A green graded assessor would be one that's made consistent assessment decisions over a period of time on the same qualification. For a green assessor, you might only observe them a few times. You might also only sample a lower percentage of their portfolios, such as 40%. This meaning if they've got 10 learners on a course, you'll only look at 4 of the portfolios. An amber assessor may be one that hasn't quite given that consistent assessment practice, but isn't a high risk, is a medium risk. So here you would observe them maybe a few times, looking at, for example, their assessment practice and paperwork, as well as maybe doing a sample around the 60% mark. A red assessor might be one that hasn't made consistent assessment decisions over a period of time. This may be because of poor performance, but also it could be that they're new to the organisation. For a red assessor, you would look at a higher percentage of their portfolios, such as 80%, making sure that that consistent assessment decisions is being made. You would observe them a higher number of times throughout the programme or throughout the year, for example. By grading your assessors, it's a great way to ensure that you quality assure that assessment practice fairly and equally. That's just one example of what could be included in an IQA strategy. The main thing that an IQA strategy should involve and include is the acronym CAMRA. C is for candidates and learners, so it should detail how they're going to be quality assured. You might state here a maximum caseload number for an assessor, for example. A stands for assessors, so it should detail all the assessors and how they're going to be managed. M is the methods of assessment that are going to be used, such as observation, portfolios, for example. E is for elements of the qualification, so making sure that you're looking at all elements. It might be a simple case that your assessors are only working on one qualification across one level, but others might need to manage a variety of assessors working across a variety of qualifications, so making sure that you're seeing your assessors work with all of those qualifications consistently. R is for the range of requirements, as I've briefly mentioned. And A is for assessment locations, so where are you going to see your assessors and observe them? The plan should also contain the name of the programs that your organisation is working with that you need to quality assure, the range of assessment sites, known as satellite sites or satellite centres, especially if you're working with an organisation that works across a wide variety of centres and locations. Learner details, so who you're working with, is it 16 to 18-year-olds, is it 18 plus, adult learners, for example. Assessor details, such as the number of learners they're working with, the workload that they've got, their experience, so if they're a new assessor or an experienced one, and the location, so where they are, so you're able to detail how they're going to be monitored. The elements that need to be sampled, such as the assessments, especially if there's live assessments going on, the units that are involved, the qualifications. It should also include the dates for planned sampling activities, so that you're able to suitably plan throughout the year, for example, to see all of your assessors. And the size of the sample. As we said, how are you going to sample each assessor and each cohort? Are you going to be looking at a certain percentage and grading your assessors? Or are you simply going to do 100% every time or 40% every time? You need to think about it and give a suitable rationale. Preparing for internal quality assurance. After you've written the IQA strategy, then comes the next bit, actually doing it. Firstly, you'll need to collect the information. The information will include the type of program or qualification that they're doing, the detail of the time period that that program's running over. Is it a week, a month, a year, for example? Learner details, so how many learners are in that group, what's their age range, for example. Elements to be assessed, so that you know what to quality assure. So what qualifications are included, how many units, what type of assessment, are there any theory tests, observations, or is it all products of work? You'll next need to communicate. So you'll need to communicate with your assessors the details of the IQA visits, to include the date that you plan to visit them, timings. You need to request evidence to be sampled, so you need to ask the assessor to bring, for example, learner portfolios with them so you can have a look at. This might include a range. So if you're going to observe them and visit them, assessing, for example, a first aid qualification, yet they also work across customer service, business admin, fitness, could be a whole range, you'll need to ask them to bring those samples in, bring those portfolios so that you can see and sample other qualifications. You'll need to detail if you're observing them to ensure that they're booking that time with the learner and telling you when they're assessing the learner so you can observe it, and also if learner interviews are required, so that learners are aware that that extra time might be needed for you to be able to speak to the learners and interview them again about their progress. You might want to ask them about the appeals procedure if they're aware of that. Are they aware of the equal opportunities policy? Have they been treated fairly? How much left of their qualification have they done? How they've been assessed to ascertain quality. The next bit that need to be involved for preparing is the administrative arrangements. For example, the sampling of files. Does it meet your sampling plan? Does it support it? Do you need to complete your sampling plan? Decisions made. So, what decisions have the assessors made? Have they signed units off, for example? Have they made correct decisions? And the feedback given, making sure that the feedback that the assessor is giving to the learner is quality and valuable feedback. And your main role as the IQA is to create that clear audit trail so it can be seen from start to finish that quality's been there throughout and it's consistent. You'll also need to look at resources. So internal quality assurance should also look at things such as schemes of work for the tutors and assessors. Is one in place? Is it being followed correctly? Such as, have guided learning hours been followed? Lesson plans. For each lesson, your tutor, who also might be the assessor, should have a clear lesson plan in place. This might be provided by the training organisation, so you should be looking at that. But they should be tailoring their lessons to suit the needs of each learner in their session. So sampling that is also a good idea. You'll need to have clear IQA records, again detailing your feedback to the assessor and your decision. Have you agreed with the assessor? Have you disagreed with them? What's your action plan that you've set them? You'll need to include the assessor details so you can see and tell what learner that you're giving that feedback to, as well as the assessor. The standards of the qualification, ideally have those ready with you so that when you're sampling portfolios that you can ensure that they meet the standards, and also guidance. A lot of awarding organisations provide guidance for training providers that details exactly what assessment methods they should be using, resources required for example, and how to assess the evidence. So having the guidance ready with you on visits and preparing for them is a fantastic way of ensuring quality. Learner interviews. Learner interviews are a fantastic way of seeing whether that quality assurance and quality assessment has taken place. If they're done privately on a one-to-one basis, away from the group, such as other learners, and also away from the assessor, it's a fantastic way of gaining feedback about how that assessor's doing, and also making sure that that learner's receiving quality support and feedback. To complete learner interviews, you should ideally select an appropriate sample that fairly reflects the assessor's allocation of learners. For example, if they have a group of 10 learners, you might speak to 1 or 2 of them. If they've got a cohort of 50 learners, you're going to want to speak to a lot more of them. You should also increase the sample if it's a new assessor, so make sure you speak to more learners. You need to ensure the selection of learners is appropriate, and the internal quality assurer should include the following within their sample: an appropriate percentage of the total number of learners per assessor, an appropriate ratio of male to females, obviously dependent on the total of numbers of each gender, learners with additional needs and requirements, such as learning difficulties. The internal quality assurer will need to check what support the assessors have put in place to meet those needs. They may have needed to adapt assessment methods, for example, or given them additional time, making sure that that's been in place by interviewing them. Should also ideally include learners with different ethnic origins and learners who may have a different first language, again making sure that their needs have been met. The purpose of the interview is to ensure the following areas and points are understood by the learners. Firstly, the name, content and planned assessment methods and dates for their selected qualifications. They should have been told by their assessor exactly what qualification they're doing, how they're going to be assessed, the name of the qualification and what's required. Should also include the centre's policies and procedures, the centre being the training organisation. Ideally, try and focus on things such as the equal opportunities policy and appeals procedure, making sure the learner is fully aware of that appeals procedure by asking them. So then you'll be able to detail whether the assessors actually passed on that information to the learner. Also looking at additional learning support or alternative assessment arrangements that may be applicable to them. For example, if they struggle with writing, has the assessor offered a professional discussion instead, for example? Their progress within the qualification, including any outstanding assessment requirements. Ask them, how are they doing? What have they got left? This should tally up with what the assessors told you in their paperwork. So again, if they're saying, I should be complete by next month, I've just got to be observed. Yet the assessor's saying they've got about 6 months left and they've got a lot more work to do. So making sure that both answers should be the same for quality. You need to ascertain their understanding of the role of the awarding organisation within the qualification. So they should be aware of who they're being certificated by. And also plus general feedback on the quality of the course. So you could include details such as how have they enjoyed it, what aspects have they liked of the course, how has their assessor been, have they been fully supported, and any other questions you may want to find out to ascertain that quality. Assessors. When planning what assessors to observe and sample, it is important to take the following into account. These should also be reflected in the IQA strategy. You should be looking at their experience. So asking yourself, are they newly qualified to the industry, such as an assessor, or are they newly qualified in that particular qualification? Are they inexperienced? Have they ever assessed before? Have they assessed that particular qualification before? Their experiences, and how many assessment decisions have you agreed with previously, such as they may come to your organisation fully experienced and fully competent and having assessed that qualification before. But because they're new to your organisation, you should treat them as a new assessor. So making sure you quality assure by increasing your sample of portfolios and observations. This will help to reassure you that that quality is there. Some organisations have failed to do this, and then when they've come to look at assessment decisions, possibly in the end stages because they've completed a lower sample based on their CV, and they've found major issues. So try and treat it as if how many assessment decisions that you have agreed with yourself as the IQA, making sure you treat everyone fairly and equally. You should also be looking at caseloads. So how many learners do they have? You may be working on caseloads by course basis with your assessors. But some IQAs will work with assessors over a longer period of time, in which case assessors might have a caseload of 50 plus learners or less, which they're responsible on an ongoing basis. If they've got a higher caseload, that should increase the risk to the organisation. Therefore, you should be sampling a higher amount. That's not just to look at more of their portfolios and observe them more to see if they're making mistakes, but the key here is support. If they've got a higher caseload, you should be increasing the support with them. You also need to look at how much other work do they have. Do they have other work in the organisations that they're responsible for? Is it going to be impacting on their caseload and assessment decisions? Or are they a freelance assessor? Are they able to allocate suitable time to the work that you're giving them? Again, stipulating that if they have high caseloads, they will need more support, so make sure that you're giving it to them. Next, you need to look at location. So the IQA must sample a wide range of assessment across a full range of sites. Try not to just go out and see the assessor at the same place every single time, even if they're working across, for example, 5 or 6 sites. Try and go to a range of sites. Next is standards. Always have the up-to-date versions of the standards with you of the qualification. This will help you to refer to it and check the version that the learner is completing when checking assessment standards. As qualifications change all the time, so making sure you've got up-to-date versions. Standards regularly change, so it's vital to have the correct version. Next is problems. Be aware of common problems in the qualification, such as sensitive subjects like safeguarding or care, or simulation evidence if it's allowed, if simulation's allowed. This will ensure sampling and standardisation is effective. So being aware of common assessment mistakes in the qualifications that you're quality assuring will ensure that you're able to support your assessors and make them aware of those common problems and mistakes to hopefully avoid them in the future. Monitoring quality. The first goal to internal quality assurance is the sampling of assessment. The aims of this are to ensure that national standards of assessment are adhered to by all assessors, to identify problems or areas where assessors require advice and development, to ensure that learners are aware of and satisfied with the assessment process, and sampling assessments should involve reviewing the quality of assessors' judgments at both formative and summative stages. As mentioned in the previous slide, you should be looking at formative sampling and summative sampling. So formative is completed throughout the duration of the qualification. It samples assessment planning and assessment decisions. The aim is for the IQA to pick up on any issues or potential issues early on and to help the assessor correct them, so you're suitably supporting them. So formative is throughout the qualification. Summative sampling is completed at the end of the qualification, when the assessment decision has been made. This is to verify the assessor has made the correct decision and quality assure it, and if they haven't, a plan needs to be set and completed to ensure that the learner meets the required standards for you to be able to claim the qualification for the training provider. The IQA is checking that evidence is valid, so that it's relevant to the standards of which competence is being claimed, that it's authentic, that it's been solely produced by the learner, that it's reliable, so accurately reflecting the level of performance consistently demonstrated by the learner, so that they can repeat it again, is current, so that it's up-to-date knowledge and competence, and sufficient, so it fully meets all the requirements of the standards. Assessor observations. As an IQA, it is important to observe the assessors making an assessment decision. This is to ensure the correct procedures and methods are being followed, and overall the correct assessment decision has been made. It is important this is documented using your IQA records and that you provide feedback on their performance. You need to look at if the appeals procedure has been explained to the learner, ideally before the assessment starts. Has correct assessment practice being followed? Again using the VARCS acronym, which stands for valid, authentic, reliable, current and sufficient. That correct paperwork has been completed, or the online equivalent. The paperwork might be set by the training provider, so your own paperwork, or it might be set by the awarding organisation. They may stipulate that their own paperwork can only be used and no other, in which case you need to ensure that the correct paperwork is being completed and also completed correctly. There needs to be a clear and correct assessment decision made and documented. So again, it provides that clear audit trail. The learner should be fully aware of the assessment decision and their right to appeal against it if possible, which is why it's important for you to check if the appeals procedure has been explained. And you need to look at the feedback given to the learner. When you become an assessor and the recent assessor qualification, assessors look at the feedback that they're giving. And we advise the assessors to use a feedback sandwich method. Firstly, the assessment decision should be made so that the learner is fully aware of the decision and outcome of the assessment, and so that then they can focus on the feedback in the next stages. The sandwich approach includes praise as the top part of the sandwich, feedback to include positive and constructive comments, which is the middle bit of the sandwich, such as the filling. And lastly, the other bit of bread should always end on praise, so you're always ending on positive feedback for the learner. Standardization. The final responsibility of an internal quality assurer is to complete standardization activities with the assessors to ensure quality is maintained and improved. The aim is that each assessor consistently makes valid decisions, makes the same decision on the same evidence base, and that all learners are assessed fairly. This can be done in various ways. For example, assessors could bring different examples of evidence that they've completed with their learners to compare, and they comment and look on the standard of each evidence. Try to keep these anonymous to avoid any negative feelings and negative comments. The assessors will then look at each of the examples of the evidence and comment on good practice and maybe, for example, highlight common mistakes that may be occurring. Then you're all agreeing on consistent and correct practice for them to be able to go away and know exactly how to assess that piece of evidence. Another way is that you could pick a particular unit and look at it and discuss what evidence could be collected and planned to meet the standards, so that you're looking at the standards and thinking, we could do an observation for this part, we could do a professional discussion for this part, to give your assessors more confidence in methods to assess that particular unit so they can all go away with an agreed method. And another way is that assessors bring evidence from common units to compare, and they comment and look at them against the standards. Again, try to keep these anonymous because it can help with feedback. Standardization needs to be documented. You may decide to voice record the standardization meetings and share it internally. You may decide that you allocate a certain person to record and log the meeting minutes. So again, you're audit trailing to be able to say what qualification that you standardized, what units you standardized, and the outcome of your standardization. So what has been agreed for all assessors to follow. You need to make sure that all assessors are attending standardization meetings. Again, these could be done face-to-face or via online. A lot of companies use online meeting points, or commonly used such as Skype, for everyone to be able to participate in standardization wherever their location is. As an IQA, if you're managing, try to ensure that all assessors attend over a period of time. So you may ask them to attend once every 2 months, for example, or once every month, and picking up on those assessors that don't, which is why it's vital for you to be able to log who's attended them. You may also ask them to provide feedback or complete standardization tasks in their own time. So for those who can't attend, you could set standardization activities for them to be able to send you in their feedback and standardization tasks, which is another great way of logging it and being able to get all assessors to participate in standardization activities. Overall, the main aim of the IQA is to develop and support your assessors so that they're able to make those consistent assessment decisions and be able to do it confidently. It is vital that the IQA manages and monitors CPD, known as Continuous Professional Practice or Continuous Professional Development, for all assessors within their team. This is to ensure the quality of assessment is met. This may be done for a few reasons. Firstly, when an assessor is new to the team or to the centre, such as they're a new assessor to that centre, or they haven't assessed those qualifications before, so they're new to the assessing that qualification. Making sure that they've got suitable CPD arrangements in place. So what are you planning for them? Have you planned for them to shadow other assessors, for example, which is a great way of doing it? Have you set them tasks so you can monitor such as standardisation activities? Have you increased the number of observations you're completing in the first few months with them, or the first few times? Have you increased the amount of sampling you're going to be completing for them? Do you need to put them on any external courses, for example? Secondly, when standards change or guidance is revised. So when you get told from the awarding organisation that qualifications are changing, the standards have changed, or that the assessment guidance has been revised, you should be communicating this to all of your assessors. Again, this could be done on a face-to-face meeting, which you should log and record for a clear audit trail, or it could be done online, for example in an email. One tip, if you're sending out any information in an email, is to set a task with the email, so that then you know that they've read, understood, and fed back to you. It's a great way of monitoring their understanding. For example, if you're then receiving feedback that's not quite correct, and you think they haven't fully understand the differences and the changes made, you may decide to include some CPD activity, such as a face-to-face meeting or a training session. And lastly, is to follow the external quality assurers, or also known as external verifiers, visits or other inspections. So making sure you're following their feedback and following their guidance that they're providing for you to be able to comply with their requirements, to quality assure the qualifications, and that correct certification is being made. These could also be from Ofsted, for example. You may be inspected by them. Again, they will provide you with valuable feedback that you need to comply with. And also Ofqual, who obviously regulate the qualifications. You should be complying with their feedback. And all of this feedback will come through their external quality assurers. So make sure that you read their reports thoroughly, take on board their comments and actions, complete the actions promptly, and communicate all the feedback to all of your assessors. To achieve effective CPD management, an IQA needs to plan a good induction to include the policies and procedures of the organisation, copies of all qualifications that they are assessing, such as standards and guidance given to them, assessment paperwork so that they've got that ready for them to be able to use and understand how to complete it, information about their learners, so who they'll be working with, information about their IQA so that they know who to contact. This is especially important when sampling and also for the appeals procedure. Information about the awarding organisations, such as who is certificating the qualifications and who they might need to contact, if at all, and access to all resources to include paperwork that they need for assessment. You need to check the assessor's details. It is the role of the IQA to check CVs and certificates, and you need to update the awarding organisation to ensure that they are fully approved and competent to assess the qualifications that you want them to. You must also check CPD activities and gain an example of their signature to check authenticity. Again, this is important when you go out and sample portfolios. The vital thing here is to get copies of their CVs and certificates to ensure they are competent to work as an assessor for your organisation. Thirdly, you're looking at increased sampling for newly qualified assessors or new assessors to your company. This should be included in CPD plans. And also CPD activities, so the actual detail of the training that they're going to be completing. Plan it thoroughly to ensure dates and deadlines and what exactly is needed, and ensure it is recorded effectively. A simple CPD log is fine. Managing assessors and resources on a regular basis is required to keep on top of quality. Resources, such as assessment material, should be updated when changes occur, and it is best practice to look at all resources every 12 months. As previously discussed, qualifications change on a regular basis, so you should be looking at your assessment material to ensure that it meets the standards. Next, you're looking at assessors, so they must have clear guidelines and standards to adhere to for performance management, so to know exactly of what's required of them. Information. The IQA must have an up-to-date information on learner numbers, qualifications that are being delivered and what assessors are working with what qualifications and what qualifications they're approved to assess, the units being assessed, planned completion dates for the learners in order to effectively manage assessors, and they should ideally be aware of when they've made assessment decisions to be able to plan and complete sampling activities. And lastly, self-assessment. The IQAs act as a link between the centre, also known as the training provider, and the awarding organisation who certificates the qualification. So feedback must be recorded and given to improve. Managing information. The external quality assurer will request the following from the IQA when planning a visit or sample. They will request a number of current registered learners per qualification and level, so you need to have this information readily available, the learner or centre enrolment and awarding organisation registration details, so how you've registered the learners and who's exactly registered for what qualifications, assessor details, so again specifically up-to-date CVs and qualifications and examples of signatures, development plans, workloads, evidence of CPD, training and evidence of standardisation activities that you've completed. They might also want to look at, when they come out and visit, learner progress reviews and achievements, special assessment requirements, for example, if assessments have been changed or if extra time's been given on theory tests, for example. They will definitely want to sample assessment records and plans when they look at portfolios. They will want to find out about learner support and resources that are available. They want to know details of the assessment sites where the assessors are working with their learners, to include satellite sites. They might also want to know subcontracting or franchise arrangements. Are you using an outsourcing assessment, for example, working with another company to do so? They'll want to see the IQA sampling strategy. They'll want to see the IQA records, including feedback given to assessors, discussions with the learners such as interviews, if you agree or disagree with assessors' decisions and assessor action plans that are put in place, records of claims for certification. They'll definitely want to see learner evidence in files and portfolios. They'll want to see records of any learner appeals or any misconduct that have taken place, and also previous external quality assurance reports to ensure that you've completed the actions allocated since their last visit. After an EV visit or an EQA visit, the IQA may receive an action plan. This may detail minor points or major points that must be completed immediately or within a set time period that the EV or EQA has given you. It is important that the lead IQA, whoever's in charge of managing IQA, shares this action with the IQA team if there is one, and also shares it with assessors so that they complete their actions if required. They also need to set their own action plan based on this other action plan by the awarding organisation to ensure that the points get completed and sent to the EQA on time to meet the deadline. With regards to claims, the IQA must ensure that no certificates are claimed for unless agreed by the IQA. Assessor records must be retained for at least 3 years and be made available for the purpose of external quality assurance and to allow for any appeals to be processed and resolved. Learner files must be kept until the next EQA visit. You may decide, if your learner number is high, that you give the files back to the learners, and tell them that they need to keep it for a minimum of 6 to 12 months, and if requested, that they send it back in. Some training providers take photocopies of learner files or electronic copies just in case they need it to be able to send to the awarding organisation. As a lead IQA, if you're responsible for making those decisions and making those claims, it's really important to talk to your awarding organisations and your own external verifier or external quality assurer to ask them their arrangements. For example, as soon as you make a claim, they may contact you straight away to say, I want to see those files, in which case you know to hold on to them until that claim's been made, and then you could give certain ones back to learners and post on and pass on the others. You may, as an organisation, have direct claim status, which means as soon as you make the claim from the awarding organisation, the certificates are sent straight away without a sample, and samples are completed randomly throughout the year to check quality assurance. With direct claims, although the speed of claiming and gaining the certificates is quicker, you need to ensure that you're having access to learner portfolios, as these may be called at a later date from when the claim's been made. Managing the appeals procedure. Every awarding organisation has an appeals procedure which is adopted by the centre and communicated to the learners and assessors at the start of a course or prior to assessment. The purpose is so that if a learner disagrees with an assessment decision, they have the right to challenge the decision by the appeals procedure. Please note that these procedures may vary slightly across awarding organisations. The assessor should inform the learner of the appeals procedure as part of the assessment briefing prior to any assessment taking place. Here is an example of one. In the first instance, the assessor should attempt to talk to the learner through the reasons they have been deemed not yet competent or haven't passed the assessment. The aim of this discussion is to get the learner to agree on areas requiring further development and to agree a future assessment date. If the learner refuses to accept the assessment decision, the assessor should refer the matter to the internal quality assurer, who will take the learner through the appeals procedure. In this first instance, ideally, the assessor should be looking at the assessment that's been completed by the learner, such as the evidence, against the standards, and clearly explaining to the learner why they haven't met the standards. The next stage is then the grounds for appeal if they further disagree. The learner would have grounds for appeal if the assessments were not conducted in accordance with the approved centre or awarding organisation's regulations, medical or other extenuating circumstances arose during the assessment process which affected the learner's performance and ability to complete the assessment. Written evidence from the assessor or GP must be provided in this instance, or the assessor demonstrated inappropriate or irregular behaviour. The appeals procedure generally comprises of the following 4 stages. So this is how an appeal would be made. Stage 1. The learner should make the appeal through the centre's appeals system via the internal quality assurer or centre contact. If the appeal is unresolved at this level, the learner should be advised of the next stage. The centre should then contact the awarding organisation's external quality assurer, who will attempt to resolve the appeal. If the external quality assurer fails to resolve the appeal, the learner should be advised of the next stage. Stage 3. A written appeal should be made by the learner directly to the awarding organisation. They will then carry out an investigation and respond to the learner in writing with a set time frame, as set out in their own appeals procedure. Stage 4. The learner will be offered a formal appeals hearing. This is generally conducted within 6 weeks and is carried out by the appeals panel, usually comprising of an independent appeals board member, the director of the awarding organisation, the lead internal quality assurer for the awarding organisation, a senior management representative from the centre or training provider, and a chairperson employed by the awarding organisation. It's important to note at this stage it generally reaches that stage of appeal. Most training providers are able to talk to the learners through before even getting to that awarding organisation procedure. The IQA process requires the management of a large amount of data and information. Each training provider will need to ensure they comply with awarding organisations' requirements, and the IQA will need to manage this. They will need to include a clear audit trail of IQA activity. This includes records of assessment, observations, learner interviews, portfolio sampling reports, and auditing of centre administrative records. They need to ensure that they comply with confidentiality, so access to data and sensitive information is kept. Only certain people should be able to access learner information and details, and also that they comply with the Data Protection Act, which is a legal requirement. Legal issues, policies and procedures. These are legal requirements laid down by the government, the relevance of which will be determined by the nature of the assessment and the working environment. These could typically include health and safety legislation and child protection and vulnerable adult legislation. Key relevant legislation, and please note that Scottish legislation may differ, can be found at the following website which we provided for you and advise that you have a look on to find out further information. Ones that you need to be sure of are the Health and Safety at Work Act, so making sure that assessment environments are safe and that learners and assessors are safe at all times. The Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations, data protection, so ensuring that you have policies and procedures in place to comply with this and that they are being followed. Safeguarding, so does the centre, so do you have policies and procedures and do you check staff that have access to those under 18 years old? And the Equality Act, so do you have policies and procedures in place to comply with equal opportunities? Technology. As technology evolves and improves, the IQA must be aware of changes and aim to implement them to improve the quality of assessment and IQA as well as supporting business needs and trends. This may include the use of technology in assessment and IQA such as voice recording, video recording, online portfolios, video online conferencing, and virtual learning environments. The benefits to implementing technology in a centre and training provider include it reduces the cost of travel for assessments and internal quality assurance as they can be completed via the internet. The reduction in cost to post resources and samples, improve efficiency, improve productivity, and increased communication. It is important to note here that although the introduction and use of technology can be fantastic and have great benefits, it should not compromise quality. So the IQA needs to ensure that all quality is assured, and it would be the same as any face-to-face assessment or paper-based assessment. Issues that could be raised here is such as authenticity and signatures. Are you able to authentically declare that it's the learner's own work? And how would you record signatures, such as digital signatures? Reflective practice and CPD. To encourage efficient and systematic reflective practice, Anne Gravel's 2001 suggests that CPD and reflective practice is an experience where you describe, analyse, revise, or known as EDAR. And she describes that this approach should be adopted. The experience is identifying the significant aspects of the assessment practice that need to be improved or encouraged. Describe is the bit where you explain who or what was involved and when and where it happened. Analyse is to consider how and why it happened. And revise is to illustrate what could be done differently. Reflective practice can be recorded as part of CPD process on monthly CPD records if there is a section designated to EDAR. This will enable the IQA to monitor CPD on a monthly basis. Equality, diversity and bilingualism. Equal opportunities legislation, so the Equality Act 2010, requires that all learners have equal access to the assessment process. Specifically, training providers must take all steps to ensure that no one is disadvantaged or discriminated against based on their disability, race, age, gender, sexual orientation, gender reassignment, marriage or civil partnership, pregnancy, maternity, religion or belief. These are collectively known as protected characteristics. This can range from having no openly discriminative behaviours in the educational environment, such as racist or homophobic language, to more subtle policies relating to the use of gender-neutral language in assessment documentation. In some cases, it may also include the use of reasonable adjustments. For example, bilingual learners whose first language is not English might be provided with translated exam papers and permitted to use bilingual dictionaries. Assessors should recognise learner diversity in their assessment materials and, where appropriate, adapt assessment content to include a variety of protected characteristics, such as assignments that reflect different races and cultures. The principle of diversity does not just apply to learners who struggle with the assessment requirements, but also recognises the need to challenge those who are more able. Where possible, the assessor should provide differentiated assessment activities so the needs of all their learners are being met, so they're specific for each learner and meets their needs. With respect to the IQA process, the internal quality assurer should check that centres have clearly defined equal opportunity, equal and diversity policies, and that there has been a clear articulated to the learner and are also being appropriately implemented by the assessor. That concludes this tutorial. You should now understand the context and principles of internal quality assurance, understand how to plan IQA, understand techniques and criteria for monitoring IQA, understand how to internal quality assure and maintain and improve the quality of assessments, understand how to manage information relevant to IQA, and understand the legal and good practice requirements for IQA.